Hi, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. My name is Kate Chance, and I am the Interfaith Coordinator for an organization called Islamic Networks Group. We've been around for 24 years now, and we work to educate people about American Muslims and try to combat different stereotypes and prejudices against these communities. One project that we've taken on is the Know Your Neighbor Coalition, which was a White House initiative launched in 2015. And we have just under 80 organizations now that are a part of this coalition. So what this Know Your Neighbor Network does is it works to educate people about different religious traditions and encourage interfaith dialogue. So we have webinars, we have different promotions of different events, we have different campaigns that we push out to meet these ends. So what we're doing today is we are asking our humanist neighbors a few questions about themselves, because often we will meet humanists who are involved in interfaith, but a lot of us don't know what that looks like. And so we have a lot of questions about why humanists are interested in this and why they're passionate about engaging in interfaith dialogue. So today we have Amanda Poppy, who is representing the Washington Ethical Union, or Ethical Society, I'm sorry. She is a senior leader, also referred to as the clergy leader. And we have Emily Newman, who is representing the American Ethical Union as their communications coordinator. So my first question is, what is the history of humanism within the United States and its history alongside interfaith dialogue?
Shall I take that one, Emily?
Yeah.
So it's a big question, in part because humanism really is a broad tradition that has a number of different sources and different thinkers. Many people really point to the early 20th century as kind of the beginning of what we would call religious humanism, or humanism that is organized congregationally. But it pulls from threads of thought that go all the way back, to the Enlightenment, to humanist thinkers during the Reformation in Europe, and then, of course, all around the world. So not only in a Western European view, there are humanist ideas and humanist thought in many different traditions over centuries. But if we look kind of specifically at how it shows up in congregational life, we tend to look at the early 20th century in America, coming about often in congregations that were originally something else, so Unitarian Universalist congregations that the minister began talking about humanism. That happened in a number of different places, and that may have continued to be UU congregations, but with a thread of humanism really central to who they were. Ethical culture, which is the tradition that my congregation is primarily a part of, started earlier than that, in the late 19th century. It started in 1876, although it really wouldn't have considered itself part of humanism until the early 20th century. So it started as a tradition that brought together people of different beliefs who wanted to act for justice, act for good in the world. Over the course of the 20th century, as humanism became kind of more of a thing in America, it became part of that humanist movement, and now it's considered a religious humanist movement alongside many others in America.
Thank you. So my next question is, what are some stereotypes about humanists that we need to work to challenge?
I'll start that. I think that, as Amanda said, that because there are a variety of humanists, and we cover a spectrum of religious and non-religious, that a lot of people tend to listen to whoever's being the loudest. And so if the louder people are expressing some anti-religious beliefs or saying negative things about anybody that believes in a God, then that unfortunately tends to paint all of humanism. When there are many people that are humanistic in their religion, so they are parts of congregations and follow along with traditions, but just have personal beliefs that make them put the people and their relationships with individuals above a supernatural belief. Also, as with UU congregations, ethical culture societies, humanistic Judaism, we we focus a lot on the action and allow people to decide their beliefs, so that we can come together and talk about various ideas. But the most important thing is that we're together making life better for the world, and we're creating more humane treatment for each other. So that is, I think, often not highlighted enough when it comes to other people's views of humanists.
Thank you.
I would just add, I do still sometimes run across folks who have a sense, so some humanists would consider themselves to be agnostic or atheist. Not all, but many. And I still run across people who haven't maybe interacted with folks who consider themselves to be atheist or agnostic, and really equate it with a kind of moral laxness. If you don't believe in God, or if you don't believe in heaven or hell, then what's to stop you from doing all sorts of terrible things? You must be an immoral person. And I think, anyone who's approaching interfaith work has to have at least some awareness that people who believe differently than they may still be good people. So I'm not sure that comes up. I don't see it that much in the interfaith circles that I work in. But I do think that that's still out there as a stereotype in America. And I would just say that the atheists and agnostics that I know are deeply moral people. They examine sort of what is right by looking at what's been right in society, by listening to others, by looking to see how people are affected by choices. So that, I think, is sort of the big one that's out there, this sense of immorality, which is very much not a part of my experience of atheists or agnostics, or certainly of humanism in general.
Thank you. So what are some shared values that humanists hold with other faith traditions? I'm going to ask Emily first, if she doesn't mind.
Sure. Certainly family and community is very important. We're all looking to find connections with people, especially those that have similar values and ideas, or like to share different ideas and work towards bigger goals. Respecting each other, so listening empathetically, being heard, feeling heard by people. Love is a big one. Sometimes people ask, well, where does love come in? It's like it comes in everywhere. Sometimes the more intellectual minded people feel awkward about saying love, but they really are still looking for that in how we interact with each other. And I know Amanda will fill in some of the ones I'm missing. I guess I'll also add personal and community development, trying to always learn more, do better, whether that means small picture, like my relationship with an individual, or big picture, how we're taking care of the world and leaving the world healthy in order to sustain future generations.
I think that was a great list. I would add that the worth of every person is a really core concept within ethical culture, and within almost any articulation of humanism. There's a real emphasis on each person being worthy of respect and dignity, and really what I would call human rights. And I see that as having such a deep resonance with other religious traditions. I think about the Christian tradition of Imago Dei, the idea of being made in the image of God. That's not language humanists would use necessarily, but it gets at a lot of the same idea, the sense of worth that comes from every person. And I often find when I'm doing justice work in an interfaith setting that my Christian siblings will say, these people who are currently being oppressed are worthy because they are made in the image of God. And I'm saying, yes, and these people who are currently being oppressed are worthy because they have inherent worth by their very personhood. And we're talking about so much the same thing, having such a sense of connection and resonance between those ideas.
Thank you. That leads me to my next question. Could you share a story with us or give an example of a time that you've engaged in interfaith dialogue with somebody of a different religious tradition or even a humanist background that's different from your own?
So almost all of my justice work is done in interfaith settings. I believe really strongly in both the collective power that we have when we work with other people. So what I serve a congregation of about 330 adults. What we're able to do by ourselves is nothing compared to what we're able to do when we're in coalition with others. So we do really almost all the justice work we do, as I said, is in an interfaith setting. And I also believe in the transformative nature of that work in and of itself. So not just pointing toward whatever it is you're trying to accomplish together, but also the experience of really being changed yourself. I actually chose to go to a Christian seminary, although I've not ever identified as Christian, because I wanted the chance to be in deep community and relationship with people who believe differently than I do. And I just found that experience to be so wonderful. For a little while during that time, I was in a group of 4 women. There was a rabbi, a conservative rabbi, a Muslim woman, a Christian pastor, so she was a Southern Baptist. She was ordained just before they stopped ordaining women. And then me as a Unitarian Universalist at the time, and coming out of a humanist background. And the 4 of us had such, deep conversations about things that were related to interfaith and our beliefs, and things that just were about being people, just about our own experiences as women who shared, living in the same area and some of our demographic info, and then we're completely different in other ways. I've always found those experiences to be enriching and transformative, and ultimately to help me also deepen my own sense of who I am and what I believe in conversation with others who believe differently. So it's both finding the commonalities and also articulating the differences, and really allowing those differences to help me be able to understand myself and my own tradition better.
Yeah, I'd say one of the big moments that stood out for me was when I was representing the American Ethical Union in 2014 with the People's Climate March, which was at the time that I was there organizing in New York. And I was part of the faith group where we were asking, who else needs to be here? Who's missing from the conversation? And when we brought up atheists and some of the humanist groups in the area, some people were not very welcome to that idea. And it took some discussion of why it's important to bring everybody to the table and include everyone who wants to fight for climate justice around. And I even, had to speak up for the atheists who weren't there to voice their opinions, and had people come up to me later and say, thank you, because, I'm an atheist, even though I'm a part of this religious group, and I was feeling a little attacked. And so it's important as we handle a lot of bigger issues like climate change that we're not pushing people away due to assumptions that that they don't have similar beliefs as we do, or they'll find, their other part of the march when we could be strengthening our part of the march. And this was that interfaith feeling was extended when I was at the Parliament of World Religions, and climate change was one of several issues that we talked about. But in that Parliament, there's such a welcoming, let me find out more about what you believe. Let me see how our work can combine to create a bigger effort. And so it was really, I'm glad that we have many opportunities to talk with each other.
Thank you. Those are both really great answers. My next question for you is a little bit similar to what I just asked. So I'm sorry if there's overlap or if that kind of stunts your creativity. But have you ever learned about your own faith tradition or belief system from engaging with somebody else of a different background? Or somebody ever helped you develop a stronger understanding of your own self, even though they're of a different background than your own?
Go ahead, Emily. I feel like I spoke to this already a little bit with my experience with the women I was working with.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, although I grew up in ethical culture, my my mother was raised Catholic and my father was raised Jewish. So I always feel like I have a deep connection to other groups. And yet it wasn't until one of my friends who's very devoted Christian had to, I think it was part of a church project actually. She was like, I need to ask an atheist some questions so that I can better understand. And I told her I'm personally not an atheist, but I can certainly give you the non-Christian perspective. And we had some really interesting discussions because I realized that I haven't had to explain my belief to too many people, and she hasn't had to question her faith to too many people as we've been, finding our own communities and kind of sticking towards them. So simple things like we'll be on a hike and we'll see a beautiful scene of the sun in the trees, and I'll say, wow, science and nature are gorgeous. And she'll say, wow, God has given us this gorgeous gift. We're both appreciating it, and we have different ways of describing it to each other, but we are both, in that moment of loving the opportunity to be together in this beautiful setting. And then, there were sometimes tougher questions that she tackled, like how do you decide right versus wrong, or how do you, if you don't have a Bible or sacred text like the Quran, where do you go for support? And it is a little scary to think that I rely on people or relationships for support. But I also realized that it's also that there's many opportunities. I look for music and poetry, and I personally love TV and movies to just escape a bit sometimes. Having conversations about random ideas, and so I think that it was really nice to be able to, with a friend, explore all of the unspoken ideas that I have about humanism and faith and whatever label you want to put on it.
Thank you. So what does humanist interfaith dialogue look like? What sort of conversations do you commonly have? I'm going to ask Amanda to answer this first, if she doesn't mind.
Sure. I and I'm sure Emily has the same experience, often encounter folks when I'm doing interfaith work who've really never heard of humanism or don't have any sense of what it might look like on kind of a practical level. Like, what do you do on Sunday mornings? Do you have a text that you work with? People often will say to me, how do you decide what to preach about? How do you decide what to talk about on Sunday morning if you aren't working through a text the way so many text-based traditions do? Or how do you celebrate marriages or welcome babies into the community? So I often have those kinds of conversations, just really practical, like here's what it looks like on Sunday morning. And, I decide what to talk about based on what's happening in the world and what I think the people in my community are worrying about and trying to accomplish, or what they're fearful about in their own lives, all of those pieces. I try to speak pastorally to their needs. So I'm often having those conversations. I typically have a little more familiarity with other traditions, practices, just because of the interfaith work that I've done, because I went to a Christian seminary, because I grew up with Muslim friends and with Jewish friends and Judaism in my own background. And actually also the congregation that I serve, the one that I grew up in as well, and many of our congregations, we actually build interfaith work into our Sunday school programming. So we use a curriculum in our 6th grade year called Neighboring Faiths, where kids learn about different faith traditions and then go and visit those faith traditions throughout the year. So our 6th graders will troop off to a mosque together. They went and visited a Zoroastrian community one year. They go to churches and to synagogues, get to know the Sikh community in the area. In DC, we're lucky to have almost any religious tradition represented here. So they actually go and visit them and then come back and talk about how that informs their own understanding of ethical culture and their own faith, their own values, their own ethical grounding, and where they see the similarities. So we really build that into our curriculum. We think it's part of being a culturally literate person, part of being someone who's able to operate and live in a diverse society that we value highly. So that's not usually true in reverse. There aren't that many religious traditions that study humanism as part of their Sunday school. So I do find that I have a lot of those just kind of practical conversations with folks.
Yeah, I was fortunate growing up to be able to do a similar thing where we got to visit different groups and learn about their faith, and it kind of felt like a backstage tour, and get personal time to ask your silly questions or what you thought was silly, which we found out a lot of people also didn't know. The other thing, and I'm losing it. I think also one of the big memories I have growing up for Spring Festival, we would put on a play, and it was often from a different tradition, like Native American folklore or an African story, sometimes stories from the Bible, and it was a way to learn about another culture, yet also give it our kind of ethical culture twist by having an impromptu performance. So a group would be the actors, a group would do the music, a group would do the sets, and there'd be no communication amongst the groups. And we put it all together and, laugh at our mistakes and cheer at our successes. So I really like the idea of being able to feel connected to different groups and learn from them, even if we didn't have everybody there with us. I think also when we talk about interfaith, a lot of it comes to the action that we take. Whether we're marching together or listening to speeches from various people, coming together, even like with a service project. We may be different places on Sunday morning talking about different topics, but we are coming together for work that we can all agree on is important and valuable to the world as a whole.
Thank you. So why is this conversation important to have now? Why is it important to but to really reach out and begin having conversations about humanists and interfaith? And to stress the importance of these conversations?
Well, I think, if you read the research on how millennials and younger folks in America identify, I think you see that the number of people who identify outside of a traditional religion is increasing and likely to only continue to increase. So we have more and more folks who don't identify as Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Hindu, who maybe identify as spiritual but not religious, maybe don't identify in that way at all, identify the nuns, they're often called. And so I think we've got folks who are outside of these traditions, and my sense is that if they are completely left off of interfaith work, they will be the poorer for it, and so will the interfaith work, right? That we'll be missing all of these people who bring their own really deep moral grounding and commitment to justice work and commitment to relationship and community, and not including them in the conversation. So I think it's a great time for the interfaith community to continue expanding its sense of who belongs at the table. I've been actually hearing sort of some changes in rhetoric nationally from folks working on in interfaith settings to talk about people of faith and moral grounding, or people of faith and ethics. Expanding the language a little bit so that more people can experience themselves as included in that conversation. I think too, obviously, sort of speaking about the national stage, obviously at this time, there's a lot of bigotry and hate rhetoric that's out there. I think it's always been out there. It just hasn't been quite so safe to talk about that nationally in the way that it is now. And that really calls for us to look that bigotry squarely in the face and to offer alternatives to make sure that even while people are hearing that language nationally, they're also hearing language of inclusion, respect, celebration of diversity and difference, and a real honoring of commonalities. And humanists tend to, frankly, be good at that. It's something that we have to do to navigate a country that is not majority of our tradition. And so I think we bring to the table that, that experience and expertise, and it can enrich the interfaith community even as we're enriched ourselves.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think that any form of othering and separating people leads to frustration, anger, unfortunately builds up to violence. And especially when that othering is happening by people in power, so that it's getting communicated as natural or okay, or something that shouldn't be addressed. And I think interface work has always been important, but as people in power have been even more obviously and loudly creating that frustration and anger, and allowing it to surmount, then it's going to be very important for our communities to get together and fight against it and show that we're not different. We do care about each other and care about the same things. And the only way for us to succeed as a neighborhood, a nation, a world, is to find those similarities that we can expand on.
Thank you. So for my last question, I want you guys to talk about what you wish others knew about you. So what you wish your neighbors knew about you as a humanist, and what you wish your neighbors knew about other humanists as well. And I'm going to ask Emily to go first.
I'll say I wish that everybody knew that humanists are creating safe and welcoming environments where you can go, whether you officially call yourself a humanist or simply have humanist values and beliefs you'd like to expand on. We have many people in our ethical culture societies that still identify with the religion they were brought up in, and some even have families where the children are going to services in both ethical culture and other religious groups, or celebrate traditions. I still celebrate a lot of Christian and Jewish holidays with my family, and I think also that putting action and values above beliefs does not attack someone's beliefs, and hopefully we can connect on a lot of actions to do great things for each other, no matter our differing beliefs.
Yeah, I would say that for folks who have never met a humanist, to imagine that we may not be so different from folks in more traditional religious settings, that we likely care about a lot of the same things, and to just bring a spirit of curiosity to conversations, which is the best way to enter any conversation, I think, certainly interfaith conversations. And I think to be open to the way that humanism has really been influenced by other religious traditions, of course, and the way that humanism also has influenced other religious traditions. So I teach a class in the congregation I serve called the Humanistic Impulse in World Religions. And I look at some of the core values of humanism and where I see them in other religious traditions. And there's not a single tradition where I don't see those elements. That's not to try to take them over or suggest really they're humanists, they just didn't know. It's just to say that the values that we hold really dear have their source and their connection in other religious traditions as well. And so I would invite people to kind of go on that presumption when meeting humanist neighbors, and to look for the commonalities.
Thank you both so much for being a part of this webinar. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to answer these questions, and I hope we can further this conversation and help share this information with other people as well. Do you have any other remarks you wanted to share, or anything like that before I close?
Thanks for having us.
Thanks very much, Kate. I appreciate your work on this.
Thank you. All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.